All right, I've got some friends here. Abdul's here, Chris is here. I would encourage you guys to turn your cameras on if you feel comfortable. How's it going, Abdul?
Going pretty well. How's it going
Good.
for you?
Doing all right, thanks. And you, Chris?
All right, doing fine.
Good, great to hear. We're gonna give it a couple minutes before we really dive into it. Right now, I'm trying to figure out how to invite people. The Zoom interface is different than I remember.
They had like an update over the weekend.
Yes. So then how do I actually get my link to share with people? I'm going to stop sharing just for a sec. Cool. Mute security. All right, Vlad is here. What's up, Vlad? He's lurking, not in here yet. Ooh, invite, there's an invite button. Cool, copy URL. Just gonna send this out to everybody. Okay, cool. All right, and Sergey's here. How's it going, Sergey?
Hello, doing good. How are you?
I'm doing okay, thanks. All right, and then Vlad is just lurking here, right? So first off, congrats to all you guys who are done your project. You're in mod 2. I'm sure you feel a lot better now that that is like mostly under your belt. I think Vlad hasn't done his assessment, but Sergey and Abdul have. So congrats on making it through that milestone. This is going to be a lighter study group today just because it's like SQL. There's not too much to it, but hopefully everybody will come out with a little bit of something. If nothing else, I'll share some tools that you guys can use to help with your projects later on. And I know you're probably like, I can't even think about projects. I just finished a project. But in 6 weeks, you'll be on your next round. It keeps going. But that'll be much cooler because you'll be building web-based applications. So that's the good stuff. Hopefully we get a few more. Otherwise, it's going to be a very intimate study group, but that's all right. Cool. So John and Jashima are here. And then for those of you who haven't been in a study group with me, I tend to like forget about the chat. So if you guys see that people are like in the chat asking questions, just yell at me because sometimes I just forget that it's there. Okay. So pretty exciting the stuff that we're moving into today. We're looking at SQL or SQL. Right, so what is SQL? Those of you who've seen that so far. What is
database
SQL?
query language?
Yeah, so it's a domain-specific query language, which means that it's like we only use it in certain areas. So we only use it for querying or talking to databases. So if we need to get information from a database, we generally are going to use SQL to do that. Right, and a database is just an organized set of data stored on your computer, usually as tables and rows. I see somebody is in the chat here. Yep, a database, Jashima, right? So it's just a way of saving information on your computer. Generally, we do it as tables and rows, right? So SQL or SQL is a language we can use to then either alter our database or pull information from it. So one little thing, I think sometimes when you're learning in a program like this, where you're mostly reading, pronunciation tends to come up and people are kind of like not sure how to say things. SQL is a weird case in and of itself. Like if you Google how, like, is it SQL or is it SQL? Like you're gonna get, basically the short answer is that both are fine. They're both commonly used. And when we talk about things like programming, people can get a little opinionated. So whichever way you go with, you'll probably at some point have someone tell you you're saying it wrong. But they're both widely accepted. Before SQL existed as a language, it was abbreviated as SEQUEL. So it was called SQL initially. And some people still use that convention. You see, I have a preference. I'll say SQL. But whether you go with SQL or SQL is totally fine. I see we have a few other people here. I see Matt, I see John, I see Sandy. How are you guys?
They're fine.
Very good. Perfect. All right, so there are some things that I want to stress. We have some goals as far as what we want to be able to do with SQL, right? So we want to have a general sense of how to use it and what it looks like, right? So how do we create tables? How do we update them? How do we delete information from them? How do we use queries to pull information from tables, like based on certain conditions, right? And we'll see, like, probably the most important bit here is like, how do we associate models in our tables? I personally like SQL. I think it's interesting. One thing I do want to stress is that it's okay if you don't memorize all of this or understand like all the nuances of it. Once we get past the SQL sections in this program, you probably aren't going to write much SQL yourself, unless you end up at a dev job where you're specifically working with SQL or you're doing backend work, right? Really, these next two sections, so this one on SQL and the one after on ORMs, is they're really giving you an under the hood look at a tool we'll use later called Active Record, right? Active Record is the coolest thing. You've seen a little bit of it so far. We talked about it when we were talking about object relationships. Like, it's kind of tedious to build that all out by hand, like your has many through or what have you, right? Active Record will handle that for you, right? And the SQL that we're learning to write now, it's valuable to understand, but ultimately Active Record is what's going to write our SQL for us, right? We're just learning what's going on under the hood. So anyone know what an ORM is? Anyone who maybe has looked ahead? An ORM.
It's a object relational mapping.
Yeah, exactly. So what's that mean to you, Abdul?
You're mapping out the relationships, like songs to artists to playlist.
Yeah, so that's part of that, right? So an object relational mapper literally maps or connects your models, so think like your classes and your instances, to your tables, right? So the convention is that when we have a class that's related to a table in our database, when we have an instance of a class that's related to like a row in our database, right? So connecting those together is what we mean by mapping, right? Yes, so the specific ORM that we're going to use is Active Record, and that's what we're building up to, right? And we'll see when we use web-based applications, so Sinatra, this mod, and then Rails next mod, right? They're using Active Record, right? Which is why we're getting a deep understanding of that stuff right now. Cool. So I guess I just wanted to stress that, because if you find kind of in this section and the next one on ORMs, there's like stuff on like building an ORM from scratch. You don't have to be able to do that. Like, you don't have to memorize it. You don't have to feel like you can do all that stuff in your sleep. It's just that this program specifically has like a pattern of teaching you how powerful tools work under the hood so that you can appreciate them and understand them better when you're using them, right? So I'm just adding that disclaimer. Okay, cool. Cool. So let's think about what we've seen already and where we're headed, right? So thinking back to your CLI projects, for example, right? We know how to implement something called persistence, right? We can save things, right? Say you have a dog class, right? You can build an initialize that lets you instantiate new dog instances, right? You can store them in a class variable called all. You can build a save method. You can build a class reader that exposes your add all, like all of your objects, right? We're not losing that, we're just adding a layer to it. Because now when we think of something like Active Record, what happens is when we do something like dog.all, we're actually gonna fire off SQL queries, right? So when we do that, Active Record will go into our database, query our database for all of the information we have related to dogs, return that, create our dog objects for us, and then give it back to us in an array, right? So it's not separate from what we've been learning, it's just building on top of it. Cool. And then when we get to actually building in Sinatra, right, we'll see how this connects to working with applications in the browser, right? We haven't started talking about things like routes and actions yet. You've seen some of the patterns. So like in your CLI project, you had to list some information, right? So when we build web-based applications, often the term we'll use is like an index view or an index action. right? I can go to a URL address that ends in, say, dogs. When I do that, if I look in my terminal, I see all this SQL being fired because it's going into my database and getting all of my information that relates to dogs, okay? So again, a lot of this stuff that we're learning with SQL is to give us a sense of what's happening when we use active record. Because you'll find, like when you're working on your Sinatra project, you're not going to be writing SQL yourself. But if something goes wrong, you might want an understanding of like what's going on in the SQL that's being fired off. You might want to look at your database, for example. Okay, so that's kind of where we're headed. Okay, cool. Questions, concerns, bad jokes before we start? Okay.
When you say when we do our Sinatra project and we'll have to look at our database, maybe, is that kind of like what we did with the API, like that kind of database, or?
Different structure, but a similar principle, right? So like part of the hurdle for your CLI project was just getting information from somewhere, right? You had to scrape a site, you had to hit an API. Not to say that you can't do that in web-based projects, but like you can store information in your database and then pull from your database, right? And we'll look at some tools you can use to visualize how your database is structured. Okay, cool. A couple things before we start. So one thing that I try to stress to you guys is that memorizing everything is super overrated, especially in programming. You'll get a sense of the things you use a lot, you'll internalize that, and then anything else, you just have to know where to find what you're looking for. You just have to know how to look it up. So one thing I'm going to share with you guys is this nice SQL cheat sheet. Because a lot of this is just like rules. Do you know what the particular syntax is? So this is 3 pages long, and it's got just about everything we need for SQL, and a little bit of stuff that we don't need, but it's nice just to kind of print it out and have it around if you find that you're getting stuck on some of the syntax or some of the rules. So I'll go ahead and actually share that in the chat here. Cool. So that's one tool that you have. Because what I don't want, like you guys are so great that some of you guys get stressed when you don't understand like the smallest nuances of everything. And really in this program, we're getting enough to be dangerous so we can build applications. So some of that stuff is going to build up in layers over time. And it's okay if you don't like if you're not dreaming of SQL, that's fine. Okay. You can look at what you need. If you do find that you want to practice more, assuming that you're not falling behind, there are 2 resources I really like. So there's one, SQL Bolt, which is kind of part tutorial, but it gives you exercises to work with. I find that the SQL documentation itself is really ugly and not very nice to parse. So I like using tutorials to practice when I'm not sure on the syntax. Another good one, W3 Schools, has a ton of stuff, some of which we'll need and some of which we don't. But those are 2 nice resources that you guys have. Can you guys hear me okay and like see everything all right? Cool. Are you guys also like impressed by my virtual background? Right? That's been an upgrade to my life. My old machine, I couldn't do it, but now that I've got this new fancy WeWork thing, mass improvement. Okay, cool.
So real.
I know. And I have a computer that doesn't like move at like molasses. It's great. Cool. So I shared those resources with you guys too, in case you do feel like, hey, the curriculum is not giving me enough to feel super comfortable. I'd like a little more practice. Cool. So the next piece, the curriculum recommends that you have some kind of software for helping to visualize your database, right? When you're going through the lessons and the labs, it's totally fine to do them as the lessons sort of line out for you, right? You can follow along in your terminal. There's commands you can run. There's some things to like format your tables nicely, like you can put headers on or what have you. And you totally can do that, right? And when you're working in labs, you can work in your text editor in your terminal. But another resource that you have that will be especially helpful when you do get to your Sinatra project is something to help you visualize your database. So the one that I think the curriculum recommends is this SQLite browser or DB browser. It's totally free and it's going to do everything we need it to do. If you ever watch videos with like Avi talking about SQL, he uses one called Base that's a little fancier. I think that's 30 or 40 bucks, but like this is good enough for our purposes and totally free. So essentially what it lets us do is a couple of things. It lets us look at the structure of our database, right? It kind of gives us some shortcuts to not have to write SQL, but we can write SQL here as well, right? Can you guys see this okay?
Mhm.
I can't zoom in into it, unfortunately. It doesn't get bigger.
Yes.
But so you can do a few things here, right? You can make new databases. You can open existing databases. You can create new tables with NoSQL. You can alter your tables. You can visualize how things are structured, right? I've got one table here already that's got a few columns in it here, right? But it's really going to come in handy when you're actually working with more data, when you've got multiple tables. So you're not just kind of tinkering in your terminal, right? So it's a nice tool to have in that respect. You can, I don't have too much going on here, just the one table. So I've got an artist table that has a bunch of artist names. I've got some duplicates, unfortunately. I screwed that up somehow. I've got some genres, and then some number of albums that I just like pulled off Wikipedia, right? But a little more user-friendly than tinkering around in my terminal, right? Oh, so I stand corrected. I was going off bad information. So base is only $20 or so. Thanks, John. So might be a little bit nicer, but same functionality overall. Was there a question? No. Okay. So, right. Okay. So a couple things I guess I can stress here. You are able to make a table pretty easily here. I'm just going to do one here as an example. I can go to, I think I have to be in database structure. Here we go. Right. So it does give you a shortcut to not have to write SQL. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to make a table called songs, right? And we see that it auto generates some SQL for me, right? So one thing I want to stress here that I've tried to sort of inculcate in you guys over time is convention, right? There's a lot of ways that we can write code that works, but as we start working with frameworks, Ruby in particular, like when we think of frameworks like Rails, really stress convention, right? They don't want you to have to build a lot of things yourself out of the box. So we get frameworks that will build a ton for you if you follow their conventions and rules for doing so, right? So if you ever see me like nitpicking with you in a one-on-one, like about your file names or your class names or your model names, that's kind of what we're getting at, right? So convention is that when we're working with Rails applications and Ruby applications, our model names are always singular, right? I have a dog class in a file called dog.rb, singular. The reason why that matters is that when we start working with tables, the convention is that those are plural, right? So just one thing to keep in mind, your models are singular, your tables are plural. I'm going to go ahead and add some keys here. The first one is the most important, right? When we keep track of information in a database, we need some unique identifying information for each item in that table, right? And the convention is to use an ID to do that, right? It's often called a primary key, right? So its data type is an integer. It's got a special value. It's a primary key because it can't be reused. It's just for that item. I'm going to add a couple other columns here. I'm going to give a name, right? And we have only a few data types available to us in SQL, right? This is just going to be text. And then I'll add one more, maybe something like a genre.
So everything on the bottom, it's all SQL. It's not Ruby anymore.
Correct. It's a structured query language. It's a different language.
Okay.
Right. But we see like we get a sense of kind of its flavor and structure, right? And again, convention matters here. For those of you who've gotten this far in the curriculum, right? You've probably seen like there's a certain pattern for how casing works, right? It's arbitrary. You can use the casing however you want. You can make it all upcase. You can make it all downcase, and it should still work. But the convention is for us so that it's easy to read. So any commands I'm running that are specific to SQL are capitalized, right? My data types and then the actions that I'm running, so to speak, right? Anything that's specific to my table and database, right? So the name of my table, the column that I want, That's all conventionally lowercase, right? We end SQL statements with semicolons, and we separate sort of values with commas, right? I could do this all in one line. I just have it expanded.
I have a question about songs being plural.
Sure.
Is it plural because of active records conventions, or is it just plural because just because?
I imagine it's not just specific to active record, right? Because I don't think it's like SQL is following all its rules based on active record. Right? I don't know who the like source of truth is there, who's the determinant. There are other ORMs, and maybe they follow the same conventions. I'm not sure, but I don't know. Does it start with the database and go from there, or is it ORM driven? I'm not sure. That's a good question. So, not sure. Okay, so next piece. When we fire off this SQL, right? So what's the power of what we're building, right? We can look at the structure of our tables. We can look at a log of all the SQL we've run, right? And again, we can visualize kind of what we have in there already. We just don't have anything in our songs table. Cool. Cool. Now to get into some actual SQL, right? So say we're focused on this, where we go, on this artist table, right? If I wanted to grab all of the information for all of the artists in that table, what would my SQL look like? For those of you who've seen that already. How do I grab all the information for my artist table? So all of the rows. Good question.
Select star from.
Yeah, so our command is select, right? That's a SQL command, so that's upcased, right? And what does this asterisk represent, John?
All.
Everything.
Yeah, it's called a wildcard. It's just give me everything you get, right? So select everything you've got, and then what comes next? From, right? And then it's the name. Then it's the name of your table, right?
Yeah,
Convention
artist.
is that. Yeah, that's going to be lowercase. From artists, right? And then we have this kind of play button, I guess is what you would call it. That's how you would run your SQL here, right? We get our return value. It just gives us everything, not too exciting here. But we can see that we fired off that SQL, no issues. We get a log of our SQL here as well. Right? Cool. What if I just wanted to grab the names of my artists? How would I modify this?
Select names from artists.
Names.
From artists.
Right, so artist is plural, and then the actual column name, right, that's singular, right? One thing worth noting is that we could specify, well, I guess it's redundant here. Yeah. So yeah, we could do like artist.name. It seems a little silly since we're only working with one table, but one thing you'll see as we are working with more than one table, sometimes you'll see the table referenced here and sometimes not. Usually you don't have to. The only time you do is if you've got the same name for a column in more than one table, then you just have to be specific. But if I run this now, select name from artists. Select brain fart. Select name from, that should be it though. Select, right, I've got my SQL command, name from artists. I must have just had a character wrong, that or I forgot my semicolon. A lot of times the Learn lessons, they're forgiving about you missing that colon, but technically you should get in the habit of having it there, right? But now we see I just get back all of my artist names. Cool. Cool. We talked about conventions, casing. Okay, cool. What if I wanted
spaces? Sorry, I was just wondering, there are spaces between the words, right?
Yep, there are spaces, right? And I would imagine that's required, but it's also like for our sanity, right? So we're not jumbling everything together, right? We also want code that's nice for us to read and digest, right? Okay, so next piece here. What if I wanted to grab a specific artist here? Like, let's say I wanted to pull all of the information for Nirvana, right? How could I do that in MySQL?
You can use where.
Okay, so you can use a where clause, right? You guys will see that in your cheat sheet too. I probably should have like said a little bit more about what's going on here. They've got stuff for like creating tables, dropping tables, altering tables. You can update. They've got nice little sections on aggregate functions. So if you want to calculate things, and then we'll see later when we get into join tables, there's some complexity there. But we can use a where clause here, Abdul, right? Can we just kind of start off there?
I think if you do select all
Okay.
from artist where
Perfect.
name is equal to what was it, TLC or Nirvana?
I said Nirvana.
Nirvana.
Yeah, right? So again, what do I want to do? I want to select some information. What specifically? Everything from a specific table, right? And then we're adding a clause, a condition, right? Specifically where the name, right, that specific column value, right, is equal to Nirvana, right? And then if I go ahead and run that, I get another syntax error because I forgot my semicolon, right? But see, I got everything. Right? If I just wanted something specific, I could say that. I could say, hey, give me just the name and the genre. Right? So it depends on what I'm looking for. But the key here is like, how do I identify which row I wanted to pull from? Right? Cool. What if I wanted to get all of the names of artists with a specific genre? Right, so I want to get the name of every artist whose genre is rock. How could I do that?
Select name from
Artists.
artist where genre equals rock.
Thanks, Chris and John. All right, so then that looks good. And we see it's not hard. It just takes a little sense of like the patterns and the conventions, right? What do I want to do? Where do I want to get it from? What are my conditions? Right, and where artist where genre equals, must be some kind of lag or something. Okay, but I get all my names back for the right genre. Right? Any questions about that bit so far? It's nothing too crazy. Just kind of practicing. Really, the cool thing here is that you have this tool that makes it a little nicer to work with and write SQL. Cool. Cool, cool, cool. Now, what if I wanted to make a table? Not the easy way, but just using SQL, right? So specifically, I want to create a table called fans that has an ID, a name, and that's it for now. How do I create a new table from SQL? You mean you don't have it memorized just yet?
Do a create table.
Did that so
Okay.
long ago.
Okay, so we
Yeah.
create table, right?
And then the name of the table.
Good, and this one we're gonna call fans. Cool,
Then you need a parentheses.
cool.
And then you're going to set ID to integer.
Yeah, so the name of my column is lowercase, but my data type is capitalized. And then this is special. It's going to be the primary key, right? It's the primary way of keeping track of which entry this is.
Right. And then you just need your column names with what data type you want them to be.
Cool, right? So then I'm going to add a column of name. This data type is text. And then for right now, is that all I want for right now? I think so. We'll add one more later. Yep. And I could either do this in one line. That works just fine. I personally think it's ugly, so I like to expand into multi-line stuff, but both are valid. Right? But now when I run that, right, again, I can see if I look at my schema, right? So I've got my songs table, I've got my fans table, I've got my artist table. So just kind of a nice way of keeping track of everything, right? When we get to building web-based applications, when we get to Sinatra, when we get to Rails, you'll still have this concept of a schema, right? What happens is you'll create files called migration files where you decide how you want your database tables to be structured. And then when you run those, they create a new file for you called a schema that's basically saying, okay, this is what your database looks like. So it's analogous to what we're doing here. It's just going to look a little bit different when we get to that point. Okay. Cool. Talked about.
The auto increment, is that not longer required?
Can you say that one more time?
The auto increment for the primary key, is it no longer required to put it in? Because I thought in the past you had to do it.
That I'm not sure. I've only ever seen where it auto increments. So when we talk about auto incrementing, every time you add an entry to a database, it will get a new ID and it increments by 1. So like the first thing you make will have an ID of 1. Let me show you. The next has an ID of 2, 3, 4, 5. I mean, I've only ever known for it to be auto incremented, so I'm not quite sure, John.
Okay.
Okay.
And it's best for it to be that way. If you're trying to tell it which one to do, you could end up trying to repeat yourself eventually. So.
Got it. So it's idiot proofing it for us. It's handling that piece, right, where it just auto increments for you. One thing I wanted to bring up, when you guys do get into project mode, sometimes students stress themselves out working with their databases. They're like deleting things, they're dropping things, and then they get really stressed because maybe their numbers don't start at 1 or maybe they're missing some. It literally doesn't matter. It just matters that they're all unique. Right? Even if you get rid of a bunch of entries and now your IDs start at 7, that's totally fine, right? It just means it's the 7th thing we've created in this table since the database was created, right? So there's nothing special about the numbers except that they're unique. Cool. Vlad said, wow, that paper is invisible. What does that mean, Vlad? He's just gonna keep us
Oh, when you had your papers, the notes, they were invisible with the background.
Oh, this?
If you're holding it up, we can't tell.
Okay, well, I don't know. Okay, so, we talked about unique identifiers. They're auto-incremented. That's all good. Now, I've got this existing table, this one that I just made for fans. It doesn't have much going on in it. What if I wanted to add a column to this table? So I specifically want to add a column called artist_ID. How could I do that with my SQL?
What is it?
You have to alter table and with the name.
Good, right? So I want to adjust this
That's
table.
right.
I want to alter it, right? And then I have to specify which table it is. So that's my fans table. And then what's next, Abdul?
Add with capital ADD, and then the column with the column name.
Add column. And then here we're going to call it artist ID. And some of you know where I'm headed with this. And I still have to specify like the data type. So in this case, it's going to be an integer. That's not how you spell that word, integer, right? So now when I run that, if I look at my database structure for that fans table, right, it's got another column. Anyone know what the significance is of this column? Like, why would I have, like, I've got an ID. Why do I have another ID?
You can use it to link the two tables together.
Yeah, so it's called a foreign key, right? You have a primary key, so like which item am I looking at right now? And then you have a foreign key which connects your current row, in this case a fan, right, to some other key in another table, right? So now that we're moving towards something like Active Record, which uses relational databases, we'll see that when we think about object relationships, there are ways that we implement that in our database as well. So we can connect objects that are related in ways that show their connectedness. So specifically when we do this, we use, for the belongs to, we use a foreign key. So when I think about my artists and my fans, a fan belongs to an artist and an artist has many fans. right? So the way that I show this is that I have this key on my belongs to object, where my has many object that says it belongs to this other thing, right? So it's a way of showing how things are related. Cool, 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 cool. So this
Just
is
curious, for
Yep.
the artist, fans, and the songs, would they all have primary keys with foreign keys linking to other objects?
If you were building a belongs to. So I actually even haven't started thinking about linking up this songs, but if I wanted to say something like a songs belongs to an artist, I would also have a key of an artist ID on this songs here, which I think answers your question, maybe.
Yes, yes.
Cool, 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 cool. All right, so we've already added our column. That looks cool. Now let's insert some data, right? So we're gonna focus on this fans table for right now, which doesn't have anything going on in it. We can make it a little more exciting. So how would I insert a fan with my name who is a fan of, say, let's say Red Hot Chili Peppers. They've got the ID of 11. So I want to add my name to that fans table, but specifically associate me to this artist.
It's really complicated. You have to do insert.
I can't tell if there's some sarcasm happening there. Okay, so there's insert, and then what next?
Into.
Okay, right.
Insert
so,
into.
Okay,
Mhm.
insert into, and then where I'm going into fans.
Fans.
Okay. And then I have to say, well, okay, which columns am I inserting into? So here, these are my column names, right?
Name.
So I'm adding in a name and
fan ID.
well, so if I'm inserting into my fans table, it will get that out of the box, right? That's the primary key. Here, I want the foreign key.
The fan ID. Foreign key, the artist ID.
Yeah, right? And then I need to give specific values. What do I want in those columns? So that's going to be, sorry?
So do you put 11 anywhere?
Almost, right? So
It's not 11, it's 9. 11 was the number of albums.
Oh, I've been doing that wrong all day. Interesting. Thanks for that catch. If I look at my data, indeed. So it is 9. Thanks for that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Cool. But yes, it should be 9. So that's where we were headed, Sandy, right? So the order is parallel, right? So I'm inserting into this column this value and into this column this other value. Cool, right? And then I finish my statement. I can go ahead and run that and then change to the right table, right? Simple enough, right? Now you can imagine it probably gets really tedious to populate our tables, right? So one little gem, get it, that I'm gonna throw your way is called the faker gem. And you'll see that mentioned in certain labs, but literally its one job is to generate some dummy data for you, right? So it's literally a gem built in Ruby. You can get all kinds of good stuff here. You need like random Pokemon names, it's got that for you. You want to get some names for Rick and Morty, it's got that for you. You want stuff related to Star Wars, it's got that for you. So its only job is to just generate data based on whatever topic you'd like, right? So that will come in handy for some of you when you're making something called seed data for your Sinatra project. So to get up and running is pretty easy. I just want to generate some dummy names. I'm going to do it in IRB, but you could just as easily require it in a project. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and require that. That's fine. And I'm just going to follow their rules for like calling those methods, right? So I'm just going to generate some dummy names. They kind of give you some interesting ones, but it just kind of takes the guesswork out of you. It just gives you some things to work with, right? Now, I guess what I first want to do, what if I want to write some SQL to change the name in this table, right? So which one of these looks most fun? I think I could handle being called Mrs. Crystal Carter. That's a pretty cool name. So if I wanted to write some SQL to get that entry in my database and to change the name column specifically, how could I do that? I heard a sound. I don't know if it was Sandy or Jashima, but it was like a high-pitched thinking sound.
And I was like, I don't know.
First, you have to find it.
So, okay, so part of it is, and that's part of our clause, like how do I know when I'm looking at the right one? Where did it go? There we go. Right, so I'd have to think, okay, like how do I identify like which thing I'm looking for? And there's a couple ways we can do that. I'm gonna start you guys off on the query though, right? If we want to update, we can update, right? That's the command that we can use. And then the syntax itself, I always forget, right? So you still have to say which table you're updating, right? So we're going into our fans table, but then you basically have to say what you're trying to set. That's how I remember it. So the next piece is what? I'm going to set some other value in another column, right? So I need my column name. Here that's going to be name. I'm updating the name of that entry, right? So updating my fans table, and what do I want to do specifically? I want to set the name column equal to, yeah, so equal to our little sample name here. One thing, this is like the least interesting thing ever. Sometimes you'll run into weird coding things when you copy paste quotes. So try not to do that, because literally if I copy paste this as a string, I'll get syntax errors. So just try to write the quotes themselves in the program, right? So I'm changing my name here, and then getting to what John said, how do I know which thing I'm trying to update? So how do I specify that, like, hey, for this specific column, right, I want to update this person's name. I guess here it's silly because there's only one, but I still have to tell my program, like, that's the name that I want to update. Okay, I can use a where clause. I think that is coming from Matthew, right? So, and there's actually more than one way that I could do this with a where clause. Can anyone think of any ideas, any examples? Where what? Based on how my data is structured.
Where ID equals 1?
Yeah, I could say where ID equals 1, right? If I knew what the ID was, or I could do it by the name, right? So in this case, I know I have this single person's name, and they're both totally fine. It's just more like, what's more convenient? What do you know? This totally works, right? And then doing it by the ID also works, like Chris said, right? And then I see my name got an upgrade, right? So a simple enough syntax, right? Not hard, just a matter of practicing the syntax. Okay, cool. Now I'm gonna go ahead and stub in some other examples, just so we have a little more data here. So if I want to insert into our fans table, and then what do we want? We need a name, we need an artist ID, we need some val. Yeah. So just gonna take some of these auto-generated names. And then I'm just going to use some repeated data. One thing worth noting when you're using this, if you keep SQL in and you run it again, the same SQL gets run again. So that's how you end up with duplicates. So just keep that in mind if you guys are going to use this tool. So we've got Delta, we've got Maynard. Cool. Add some more. Juliana Moore is like a normal name. Not that interesting. Fancier, all right. Just so that we have something to work with. Cool. And then I'll just add some variety here. Right. So then I can run my SQL. I can see that I have errors because there's this persistent semicolon issue. But now I can run, I can look at my data and see that that's populated. Okay. Now, what was my next goal? Where? So that one we needed. What if I wanted to select all of my fans who are not fans of, who's number 3 here? I think three is the Beatles, right? So if I think about my fan table here and how it's structured, how could I say something like return to me all the names of my fans who are not fans of the Beatles, right? So 3 is indicative of the Beatles. How could I do that to say that I want something that's not some other thing?
Exclamation mark.
Okay, right, you can use the bang operator, right? So it's still the same pattern, select, and I think in this case we wanted names, right?
Names.
So select name from our tables, right? We can still use a where clause, right? Where, which column is this?
Artist ID.
Perfect, right? Where artist ID is not equal to 3. And that should work just fine. We get everybody else, right? So just some of the things that you can do. Cool, cool, cool. Perfect.
Can you also write is not? Isn't that a thing?
Yeah, where, I don't know if it's is not, I think where, you know what, this is good, because I think the SQL, like the W3 schools is good, and or not, because I don't think the curriculum talks about this too much, or if they do, it's in passing. Yeah, so you can say where not.
No.
That's totally
Or not,
right.
yeah.
So then we could even, so we, let's say we wanted, I mean, just the same idea, right? Where artist ID not 3. Where artist ID, I think it's actually where, what's an example? They didn't actually give the
I think they just want. I think they want the condition after the not. I think that's it.
where not.
Or not 3.
Oh, like if you were to say.
Where not artist ID is equals to 3.
Or not equals 3. Yeah.
Oh.
No,
It's
no,
a little
no.
funky, no?
Yeah,
No,
I think
artist ID.
that's it.
It's a little funky. Totally works. Cool.
That's
Right?
it.
So yeah, I knew we could rearrange the pieces in some way to make it work. But yeah, we have 2 ways of sort of accomplishing the same task, right? So those are just some of the simpler examples of what we can do here. We also can have SQL calculate things for us. We can have it order things for us. So for example, if we were to think about our artist table here, right? What if I specifically wanted like the names of all of these artists alphabetized, right? From A to Z. How could I do that?
Order by.
Select.
Okay, you could use an order by, right? And it kind of starts off the same, we're just building, right? I still need to get some stuff specifically named, right? From a specific table, right? But now I'm just being opinionated about how I want that presented to me, right? Your background is super cool, Chris. I just saw it like in passing.
Thank you. That's all right.
Right, so we can use order by, and then what's the default?
Should be ascending.
It should be by ascending. So I can say order by name, and the default is that it will be alphabetized. Right?
Alphabetized. Yep.
Yeah. And then if I wanted to reverse it for whatever reason, I can say desk. Let's go ahead and flip that. Right? So then here it starts from the end of the alphabet. Right? If I wanted, say, in ascending order, but only the first 5 results, how could I do that?
Limits.
Cool.
Yeah. Limit.
Right? So I could say, spelling, limit 5. Right? Go ahead and run that. Easy peasy. Right? So really it's like building on a structure we've already seen. It's not too bad. Right? Now it gets a little more interesting when you're calculating things, and then later on when you're joining tables together. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So if I wanted to say, figure out like which of my artists here have the greatest number of albums, right? How could I do that with SQL?
you can
select
order
name from.
Okay. Oh, you're right. I didn't actually specify what I wanted, but like I could say,
You can say max.
yeah. So like for right now, we'll just give the count, but I can say just specifically select the maximum, right? And then I have to say of what, like what is the property I'm counting on, right? That's going to be num albums. And I think, no, I still got to say what table, right? That's from artists, right? So again, what do I want? But here I'm using an aggregator. Yeah, Max is an aggregator, right?
I would do it. I would use the maximum album in a where statement and then get you your names. Otherwise, the numbers don't mean anything.
Otherwise, the numbers don't.
Does that
mean
make sense?
anything.
So you would select the name
Oh.
from artist, where your maximum albums.
Where?
Otherwise, you just get a list of numbers.
Yeah, because it just literally found the max of everything. So select all from. Select the name from artists. See, that's a little confusing to me. And then you just say where max. And what did we say? It was num albums. Interesting. From artists. Did it? Nah. We're num. Select. All right, we consult our cheat sheet.
I guess the aggregate is always before.
Max returns the maximum value in a list.
Yeah.
So it is one of your selectors.
Select name from artists. Getting ahead of myself here.
Oh,
I think you have to do
Where-
name and then max
Select.
albums.
I figured it out.
Okay.
You're supposed to use having for aggregation instead of where.
Having.
it's having.
You. So
Been a long
having.
time.
So having max. Oh, that makes me twitchy. Num albums. Cool. Num albums. Plural. There we go. No?
Give it a shot.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
Let's see
Having.
here. Select.
Come on. Albums. Oops, that seems ugly. No. We'll press pause on this. I overestimated my capabilities with aggregators. But we'll come back to that.
You can also order it by descending order and then
Can.
pick the limit it to 1. It should theoretically output the largest number.
Oh yeah, you could do that,
Smart.
right? So yeah, you could. So you could say select. What are we even selecting at this point? I think we wanted the name. And then from our table, that's artists. And then you could do order by, num albums. And then we want it descending and then limit 1. Desk, limit 1. Does that pass the smell test? I think so.
Yep.
Perfect. Right. And then if
Yeah.
we want, yeah. Okay. Right, so we got something. But just a sense of like some of the things that you can do here. You can count maximums, averages. You can group things by a specific result. So like, let's say if I wanted specifically to, I think this will work. So if I do something like select specifically the genre, and then I think what I want to do is to count the number of albums like per genre. So I can say select genre from my artist table, but I also want the actual count. So not just the name, but the count of what? Num albums from artists, and then I'm going to group by. What does group by do?
If it has the same name, it groups by the name.
Yeah, it's going to group them together. So I'm going to group by the name of the genre. There we go. And I think that will do what I want here.
There you go.
Yeah, perfect. Some success, right? So just a sense of some of the things that you can do. It can be a little bit tricky to sort of figure out like the structure of your clauses and things. Some of you guys have great memories too. Like Abdul and John and Chris, you're all killing it. Whereas I'm like a baby deer looking at some of these sometimes, but.
And
right.
if you want to use an aggregator, you have to use it in the select criteria,
Yes.
like the count here. So the other one with the max, it should have been in the select.
Got it. So like, I guess that's a good way. So like if we were thinking back to that one, when we were in, what was it? I think it was still the artist table. So like, let's say I wanted name, and then I wanted max of whatever it was. It was num
albums.
albums, right? But then, so that's just what I want.
From.
Okay. Need a table, you're right. From artists. Something about that. No, I still get the, oh, if you group by, what are we grouping by?
This is one.
This is just
Oh, I guess if we wanted,
group by genre. Yeah, so I thought we were doing 4.
cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I lost track, took myself in circles. Okay, so pretty cool. And again, like, as far as the SQL stuff, it's okay if you don't have everything memorized, right? We're probably not going to do much of it after this section. You do want enough to be dangerous when you're like working with your application and you're looking at the SQL that gets fired off in your terminal, right? When you're making requests and things like that. Any questions about anything we've covered so far? For you guys who have seen SQL, are you guys liking it so far? Like mod 2 stuff? Have you looked ahead? Have you gasped? Have you started looking at your mod 2 project and what that might look like?
No, not yet.
That's okay. And you know, some of you are still like recovering from your first project, and that's fine. I would say like, if there's one thing because this is my first go around, for those of you who don't know, this is my first cohort, right? So one thing I feel like I would have done differently in mod 1 is like made you guys look at that project earlier on. So you had a sense of like, I got to do this at some point, even if I don't know what all of these words mean. So it's just something to consider, right? You've got that whole mod 2 released already. You can start dipping your toes in the water. Maybe not quite yet, but like just know that that information is like already out there. Okay.
Yep.
So far I have been working on the bonus material.
Got it. Which brings me to my next point. Well, you're real fast, John, so you have the time to like kind of breeze through all of it. For most of you, if you haven't already, you'll see that there are a number of like bonus sections in this module. There's, I think it's rack, there's HTML, CSS, all that stuff is important, but don't do the bonuses first, right? Do all the required stuff, and then you can always come back, right? If you bought yourself some breathing room, if you're ahead. Just because you've seen like the pace can get a little stressful. Sometimes life gets in the way. You never know if you're going to get sick or if something's going to happen. All right, Abdul, are you reminding me about the drop table command? Is that what your comment is saying?
No, sorry, you were asking how to clean the table, and I meant to write truncate table, but I accidentally wrote drop table. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah.
You don't want to drop.
You don't want to drop it.
I've done that before. So.
I think if any of you are like, I feel like an old person. If any of you are into the Reddit, but like if you follow any of like the like programming subreddits, I think there's some horror story that gets brought up every so often where they had a junior dev who like accidentally dropped their tables, and he's like, I'm gonna get fired. What do I do? And they're all like, this shouldn't be on you. You shouldn't be able to do that as a junior dev. You shouldn't have that much power. So like your management structure is all messed up. But like, yeah, you generally don't want to drop your tables. Sometimes if you run into schema issues in like this mod, when you get into active record, sometimes you might drop a table just to resolve the issues, but like not a good practice to get into in general. And then I don't know, for those of you who are ahead, do they talk about SQL injection in the lessons?
They briefly mention it, but they don't go into details.
Yeah, so there's this idea that like if you're not careful and you're not like kind of cautious about how you'll let users enter SQL, you open yourselves up to something called SQL injection. Like, what's that mean?
So like users can drop the table if they wanted to, if you allow them to input values. So you have to use question marks.
Yeah, so like if you let them like enter in their own SQL or like their own, I'm phrasing this badly, but if they can just kind of enter whatever they want, they could, in theory, enter commands that are SQL commands. So they could add in there something like drop all tables, right? And again, getting into Reddit, I think there was a thread the other day about like people who like do ethical hacking. They're like, here's this database that like, or like this website that does all kinds of terrible things towards people of X, Y, and Z groups. It would be a shame if someone like accidentally dropped all of their tables so they can't harass people online. So we're getting like way off topic here, but like just kind of a chain of association, some of the things that you think about. But yeah, in theory, I guess the punchline was, in general, it's bad to drop tables.
What does that mean to drop tables?
Good old Bobby tables. 1 second. Oh yeah, so this, I don't know how to phrase this, but this website has a lot of like, if this is the one I'm thinking it is like comics related to coding. This is your son's school. You're having some computer trouble. Oh, Bear, did you break something? Oh, they say, did you really name your son Robert Drop Table Students? Oh yes, little Bobby Tables, we call him. So that's a joke about like SQL injection. They're injecting a command that would drop their tables. That's cute. Thanks for that, Vlad. Cool. So I think at this point, I think that's Chris over there. He's enjoying
I'm sorry.
stuff. No, you're good. I appreciate it. Yeah, it's cute.
I'll mute myself.
No, you're good. I think I'm just about done. I appreciate the comment. I can be a little dry if any of you haven't noticed. So I'll take the last where I can find them. I think I've kind of hit my main points here. Really, I just wanted to review some basic syntax with you guys, give you a couple of cool resources if you find that you want just a little more practice to help internalize the syntax. And also this visualization tool for your database, right? Really cool to have in your back pocket if you want to kind of poke around and see how things are structured. And then just for those of you who maybe like you're just getting into it, you might be a little overwhelmed by the syntax. It's totally okay. We're just getting a sense of like some of the things active record will build for us later on. Right. Any questions, concerns, bad jokes? Does anyone want to like scream into the void about their project, get anything off their chest? No, we're all okay.
Just wanted to clarify. So drop table means you wipe out your data information?
Well, it means that you drop that table. So let's.
Okay, so like the table you built on SQL. Okay.
Yeah. So like if I put a lot of work into that artist table. I'm not gonna drop that one.
Don't do that.
I can do my songs table, right? So if I just say drop table, I think that's all you have to do. Drop table songs.
Yeah.
Right. I go ahead and run that, finish without errors, it dropped my table. If I look at my database structure, I lost it.
It's gone.
Yeah, it's gone. Like it never happened.
Okay.
Right. So in general, you don't want to do that. It's not best practice. But sometimes you'll see when you get to your Sinatra projects, sometimes database stuff can be a little hairy.
There is no "Are you sure?"
There. Well, if you use their friendlier version. So like how do I do this again? I think I just right click.
When you're writing a command line, there is no "Are you sure?"
That's true. Yeah, not for this, no. Here, I am not sure. Cool. All right, I think that's it for me. If you guys don't have any other questions, was this helpful? Did you at least gain something out of this that you could use in the future with SQL?
Yes, very
Yes.
helpful.
Very helpful. Okay, guys. Any last things? No? Keep chugging ahead. Stay on pace. I think just about everyone in here, I have like one-on-one time with you. If I don't have you in a pod or a one-on-one with me, reach out to me so we can schedule something and we can get you situated. For those of you who haven't done your assessment yet, good luck to you, right? If you want to practice on me or one of your cohort mates, totally cool. If you run into any issues related to project stuff, those of you who haven't officially passed your assessment, like just yell at me and we'll try to get it resolved. Okay, cool. All right, if that's it, I'll let you guys go and enjoy your evening. Happy Mod 2. When we meet on Thursday, we'll be organizing some bears for those of you who've looked ahead and you've seen that lab in particular. Cool, and then next week we're on to active record, the good stuff. Or ORMs.
Word of advice, keep up with this one. There's a crap ton of information in this section. So it goes on and on and on.
For the
For
ORM
this
stuff?
section, yeah. For all of it, all the way through Sinatra. It is an endless list.
But
So,
on that inspirational note, yeah. So I mean, well, I don't want to leave you guys feeling afraid and bewildered. But I mean, so there is a lot in these sections related to ORMs and active record, right? But that's partly why I kind of had this disclaimer at the beginning, like even though, so one, a lot of these are code alums, but they're also not meant to be things that you just like hop into a one-on-one with me. Okay, build an ORM from scratch. Go for it, Matt. Like, I'm not gonna do that to you guys. It's just giving you a sense of how active record works. You're getting the sense of how things work under the hood. So it is a lot, but just know that you're kind of getting a foundation that helps you appreciate how amazing active record is, right? Because active record's not going away. We're gonna use it. Ominous giggle. We're gonna use it in Sinatra, right? And then, well, you guys can't see Mod 3, but Mod 3 is Rails, which also uses active record, right? Mm-hmm. So it's good, right? And soon we'll be getting into web-based applications. I was talking with one of you guys today. It's a lot more satisfying when you're building something web-based versus in your terminal, right? So that's the future. That's what we're working up to. Cool. All right, well, I think that's it for me. You guys have a great night. Let me know if you run into any issues. Let me know how your assessments go. Keep me posted. And I'll see you guys on Thursday.
Okay.
Thank
All
you.
right, have a good night, everybody. You're welcome.
Bye.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye.
Bye.
No.